Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody. This is Howard Fox, and welcome back to the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is Linda Lloyd. Linda is the author of the historical novel, The Syrian Peddler. Linda retired from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and she and her husband moved from Columbia, Maryland to Austin, Texas. She now spends her time playing piano, volunteering at the People's Community Clinic, reading, and taking writing courses. Her novel, The Syrian Peddler, was published in 2017, and an audiobook was published in 2018, and it's available on audio. Linda, welcome to the Success Insight podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Howard.
So, what a journey. I mean, talking about your grandfather and the family and kind of taking a look back into history, and part of it's fiction, part of it's historical, nonfiction. And what was the initial, insight or revelation, like, I need to write this book? Where did this come from?
Well, the story started when I was taking a writing class at the Columbia Public Library, and we were asked to pick a topic to write about. So I thought about my grandfather coming from Syria, and I'd always wanted to do more research on it. So I started writing, and it turned into a project where my husband and I traveled all over to different places to see where he lived. We went to Ellis Island. We went to the Walcott Hotel in New York City. We just visited all the places that had memories of him.
And when you were doing this research, was this over the course of a couple of years?
Yes. It started in 2014. And at that time, we were living in Maryland. And then in 2015, we moved to Austin. So actually, I should go back. We probably started doing the research travels in 2013.
Okay.
Because I was writing the book when we moved to Austin in 2015, and I finished the book here. But prior to moving here, we had done all of our travels for the research.
And as you were conducting the research for the book, I mean, what assistance did you get? Like, we know we have to go to Ellis Island. We need to go to the apartment or the street where he lived and where he had his shop. How did you plan out that kind of itinerary?
Our first stop was Ellis Island, and we did find the registry from the ship that he came over on, the USS Neustria. And then there were photos of people. You could see where the different checkpoints were, where the immigrants would go through as they came into Ellis Island. So I had a visual picture of what occurred there, because it's a huge building, and they have a large lunchroom where the immigrants would have a hot lunch or maybe just coffee. I don't know exactly what they serve, but they also had access to a bank, to the telegraph, people meeting them, and you could see the different checkpoints that they had to go through, like to get an eye exam and to answer the essential questions to get them into the country. Like, do you have money? Is somebody meeting you here?
Okay.
That gave me a picture of what he actually saw coming into the harbor. And so that's where we started. And then my husband had a health officers meeting in Salt Lake City. So while he was there, I went to the Family History Museum, which is run by the Mormons. During that time, I was able to do some research and get some help from the Family History associates there. So I found some more information on the family.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about your grandfather. And during the introduction, you used the term for grandfather. Was it Jiddu or?
Yes. The term is Jiddu. And there's two. That's Arabic for grandfather.
Okay.
And you can spell it G-I-D-U or G-I-D-O-O.
Okay.
So different people spell it different ways.
We want to give equal time to grandma. What would you call the grandmother?
Sittu.
Sittu and Jiddu.
Yeah, it would be S-I-T-U or S-I-T-O-O.
Okay. What was the compelling reason to come over to America at the turn of the last century? I know Syria was still a part of the Ottoman Empire and on its decline. And what was the compelling reason to emigrate to the United States?
At that time, the Ottoman Empire was heavily taxing the Christians in Syria. So to avoid the heavy taxing, many Syrians came to the country and looked forward to starting a life in the New World.
Okay. And when they came to Ellis Island, did they have an idea where they wanted to emigrate to within the country?
Well, my story about my grandfather, now that part, I don't know the real story for him.
Okay.
But he had, most of the people who came over knew somebody here who would, quote, sponsor them.
Okay.
So my grandfather, Sam, came over and did apprentice work with Anthony Abraham. And so Anthony had immigrated from Syria a few years before Sam, and he was a few years older. And Anthony was a peddler. And of course, at that time, many Syrian immigrants settled in Pittsburgh also, and Uniontown.
Okay.
And the reason they went to that part of the U.S. was the coal mining country. They could peddle to the coal miners their goods.
Okay. And so with the novel, tell us a little bit about the construction of it. What is since this is somewhat historical, is it more, would you call it fact-based, or is it fiction, nonfiction?
All the facts in the book are correct. The historical facts are correct. I made sure that everything I talked about in the early 1900s was based on checking out to see whether factually this existed. Did the women use hairpins? Was there a Singer sewing machine? What ballpoint pens were available? What watches? Everything he sold, and I checked to make sure that that was available in 1905, 6, 7, and on. So I made sure it was factually correct. And then in part 2 is mainly nonfiction, because part 1 is when my grandfather comes over, and he died when I was 16. So I really didn't have the opportunity to put the story together when he was alive. And when I started writing the book, none of my grandfather's children were alive. I had to do research.
Okay. And so tell us a little bit about the flow of the book as you're starting to write it. What are some of the highlights that you would like the readers to take away about this journey, coming over here, to starting a new life, starting a very successful business venture as a successful peddler? And tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I think that he had a tremendous desire to succeed in America. And he worked to fulfill those dreams, and he practiced honesty. He was trustful. He was compassionate with his customers, and he wanted to be a success. And he wouldn't send for the love of his life until he managed to make the money that he needed to bring her over and support a family.
So he came over here by himself first?
He came over at the age of 17.
Okay, and he was on his own?
Yeah, and his time on the ship was spent working in the kitchen to earn extra money.
Okay.
His family in Syria had enough resources to send him first class. But in order to repay his father for the tickets, he worked in the kitchen.
Oh, wow.
And then he saved money. And on the ship, he met a young woman who's an Irish woman. Mm-hmm. And they had somewhat of a romance.
Oh, boy.
And that flows into part 2.
Okay.
And the Irish woman he met is based on my Irish grandmother, who was on my mother's side of the family.
Okay.
My mother's Irish.
Okay.
So he had this little, I wouldn't say love affair, but
he had a fling.
They enjoyed each other.
Okay.
He's very Syrian. He's true to his culture. Mm-hmm. So he settles in the Syrian town of New Salem, where most of the people are Syrian.
Okay.
Then he starts his peddling business with Anthony, his friend.
So tell us more about the peddling business, the peddler. I mean, in the traditions of the Middle East and of Europe, I'm thinking Fiddler on the Roof and the peddler's cart.
Yes.
So what were the wares that he was making and selling, and who did he sell them to?
Well, it's interesting you ask that question. One of my father's sisters, my Aunt Honey, I used to spend a lot of time with her. And she would tell stories of how she helped her father, my grandfather, pedal as a young girl. And he would have a cart, or he would put stuff on his back and she would carry things. And they would go through the town and they would go up to the coal mining towns. They called them patch towns.
Okay.
And he would sell housewares, sewing supplies, needles, thread, fabric, patterns, men's undershirts for the coal miners, heavy boots. And those were some of the items he sold. And eventually he opened his own dry goods store.
Okay.
So that was his goal, to eventually make enough money and have enough customers where they could come to the store and shop also.
And was the dry goods store in Salem as well, or is that another location?
No, he opened that in Masontown, Pennsylvania, which was probably 20 miles from New Salem.
Okay. And how long did it take him to raise enough money to bring others over to the U.S.?
Well, he brought his wife, Zawi, over in 1907, 2 years later.
Okay.
He worked for Anthony, and then he made enough money on his own peddling where he could open his own store.
Okay. And that was the store that was in Masontown.
Right. And the Anthony store was in New Salem.
Gotcha.
Interesting fact about that time is in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, in the early 1900s, they had the highest number of millionaires in the country because it was the men who lived in Uniontown owned the coal mines.
Oh, okay.
So the money came from coal mining. And so a lot of the men then would come in to shop at my dad's store, my grandfather's store. I spent time in his store from the time I was in I lived in the same town he did when I was in kindergarten.
Okay.
From then on, I would spend time at the store visiting, and in the summers, I would stay with them for a while.
Okay.
So I got to know the store pretty well.
That's actually kind of amazing, growing up and your grandfather had a dry goods store and you get to work in it. I had family whose parents had pharmacies, and it was always a treat when my parents would take us to those pharmacies. It was like a kid in a candy store.
I know. I would go in and I didn't really work at it, but I could pick out a pair of shoes and help my grandmother in the kitchen because the store was right in front of the kitchen.
I do want to talk about the kitchen because I remember when you and I first chatted, as I probably shared, and if I didn't, I'm remiss, but I think I did. I love to cook, and I would have to say food from the Mediterranean, the Middle East is probably at the top of my list. I could eat it every day, and I would be a very happy man. What is going now on in the book? I mean, what are some of the other threads that are taking place in the book? Well,
my grandmother's name was Zawi,
mm-hmm.
and my grandfather's name was Sado. Before they came over, they're Arabic names. When they came over, they became known as Sam and Anna. So one interesting thing that happens when she comes over is they have to plan her wedding. And she meets a woman who's the wife of one of the coal mining supervisors, Mrs. Mary Banco. And Mary helps her design and sew her wedding gown. The interesting part of that is when I first started doing research for this book, I talked to a family member, a relative of Mary Banco, who, of course, Mary's not living anymore. But this woman told me that her grandfather had kept a winter coat that he bought for my grandfather for years and years and years, and she remembered that.
Oh, wow.
And she actually remembered the store. So there are people still in Masontown who remember the store.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's such memories. When you
the kitchen. You want to know about the kitchen?
I want to know about the kitchen. Let's talk about the kitchen because I love to cook.
You walk in the front of the store and the store is at the front. And then when you go towards the back of the store and you walk into a big kitchen. And off the kitchen, there's a little sitting room, which doesn't have a door. It's just an open space where they had bookcases and a small TV and couch and chairs. But it was a huge kitchen, and she probably could seat 16 people at the table. And she also had 2 ovens downstairs in the basement and a big freezer.
Oh, wow.
So they would bake Syrian bread in the basement, and then she would lock them up in the freezer so all the boys wouldn't eat them. They'd eat them all if she let them.
I would eat them all.
Yeah, so my Aunt Honey told me that she would put them in the freezer, and the boys, because there were 5 boys in the family, the boys would eat the Syrian bread so fast that they had to put a lock on the freezer.
Oh God! Now, one of these 5 boys was that your father?
One of them was my father.
Okay. And
it was John, Tony, my dad, Louis, Michael, and George, and then the 2 girls, Mary and Honey, and then my grandmother's 2 children who came over from Syria, Mitlaj and Martha.
Okay. Wow. I mean, your aunts and uncles. I mean, those names are like, they could be just like George, Ringo, and John. That's just when you were saying the name, I'm thinking like, oh, the Beatles.
Yeah, right.
So I would have to say, I mean, you've got this big kitchen, you've got the store now. There had to have been obviously a lot of family, but a lot of love and activity. Just centered around having this store.
Yes. And then the family lived upstairs above the store.
That was my next question is, did they live up?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my grandparents had the front bedroom. And then there were like 4 bedrooms in this hallway and a bathroom. I only know because I spent time there. My cousin and I would sleep over there. So we'd sleep in one of the bedrooms upstairs. So I guess the boys would double up and share rooms. So I guess they had 4 boys. So they had 2 in a room and 2 in a room, and the girls would be 2 in a room. Okay. The children were all 2 years apart about. And all the stores had flat roofs at that time. So the boys my father would go up on a roof and he would put a black cape on. And he would pretend he was something. I can't remember what they called him, the Roaring Ripper or something. And they would jump across the rooftops and chase each other.
Oh, God. I don't think that can happen anymore in this day and age.
No, I don't think so.
When you kind of look back at the book and the parts of the book, I mean, part of it is just coming over and starting a life and now very successful with the store. What you know of your grandfather, and you do allude to it that you didn't spend as much time looking back as you would have liked to get to know him and hear his stories. But do you have a sense that he was happy what he was doing and where he was and the impact he was having?
Yes, I do. Yeah. He did so much for his customers. There is he loved that store, and he had a big garage, and he loved cars. So he had a big garage, and it was one of those garages where you go down into the basement, and cars would be in the basement. So he loved cars. He loved fussing with cars, and he loved his customers. He learned to speak 3 languages just to talk to his customers.
Wow.
And there's one story where there was a young man in the service, and he called, somehow his mother got in touch with my grandfather, and my grandfather was able to make a suit for him. He was getting married over there to send over for him to wear, something like that. So he was very happy, and he was very proud of the Syrian Orthodox Church he founded.
Okay. Now, the cover of the book was one of the stained glass window from the church, right?
Uh-huh.
Now, is this church still there?
It is still there. They celebrated their 100th anniversary 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in 2017.
Okay.
3 years ago. I visited the church. My husband and I went to Brownsville, and we were there on a Monday. We couldn't get in the church. And it turns out that the deacon has 2 churches, one in New Kensington and one in Brownsville. So his home is New Kensington, and he only comes there for one Sunday service a week to Brownsville. It's a small parish. Mm-hmm. We couldn't get in, and I knew my family had a window there with a name on it. Okay. My grandfather had donated the window. So we managed to I managed to find a photographer in Brownsville who met the deacon there one Sunday, and Wilbur took pictures of the window for me and sent them to me. And that's how I got the photos of the window.
Very nice. Now, In the book, and you've got this nice picture on the cover, and we'll definitely want to get a picture of the book cover so we can put that on our show notes on the Success Insight podcast page. Do you have other pictures in the book of the store, the towns, or some family heirloom style images that would that you're using to kind of communicate the story to your reader?
I do have on page 150. There's a photo of the store.
Okay. So you got a couple. That's good.
And then I have a photo of the family in 1921 with all the children except the youngest boy, George. He wasn't born then. And then I have a picture of 1930 with all the children there. And then I have a picture in 1958 with all the children and my grandfather. And that was the year he died.
Oh, wow. Okay. What would be great, Linda, if when we are preparing the podcast, if you can share those images with us, we can definitely want to be able to include those in our show notes so our readers can kind of see some of those images and of course go out to the book and read the story and learn more about your family and your grandfather's history and legacy. I was reading one of the reviews on Amazon, and there was this hope that you're going to write a second book. Is there another book in you to continue the story?
I am. I'm writing it right now. It's based on my grandmother's story.
Okay.
It's based on the same story, but from my grandmother's point of view.
Okay. Very good.
My grandmother plays a pretty silent partner in the first book.
Yeah.
And so this is written, her telling her about her experiences and how she felt. And the biggest problem she had with my grandfather was that she had been married and widowed in Syria and had 2 babies there.
Okay.
And she came over without them, thinking that she could bring them over. And it took my grandfather a long time before he brought them over. Okay. I mean, he opened the store, he started a church, he opened the store, and finally he was able to bring them over. And I think she was very frustrated that they were 14 and 16 when they came over.
Okay.
And nobody in my family knows who she was married to or what the story was.
Right. Okay.
And I mean, even Aunt my 2 cousins who are Martha's children said Martha would never talk about it. Maybe she didn't know because she was a baby.
There's a mystery there. There's a mystery. I find it's interesting. There's so many immigrants coming over into the United States at the turn of the last century from Europe, Russia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. And just, it's an amazing, to me, it's like chicken soup. I mean, chicken soup is just putting a lot of things together and you make this wonderful meal out of it. And it's a melting pot. There's the perfect analogy. That's why it was truly a melting pot of different people and cultures coming together and finding a way to live together and to, become friends, hopefully, but to share a good meal and learn each other's traditions. And that must have been a phenomenal time for your grandfather coming over here and eventually, your grandmother coming over here and just kind of, making a life for themselves here. What has been the reaction to the book from people that have read it? And I did see that you've won an award for the book, as well as you were actually speaking or had a table at the San Antonio Book Festival back in April of last year. So tell us more about some of the reaction to the book and what you've been doing to promote it.
I've spent a lot of time marketing it, which is why I haven't written a second book. I've spent 2 years marketing this book. What I did is I made sure that the libraries, I could get it in throughout the country. So it's in my hometown library. One of my sisters put it in the Huntington, Vermont library. It's in Avon, Connecticut library, Farmington, Connecticut library, Austin Public Library. So I've tried to make it accessible that way. I also have it consigned in 4 bookstores in Austin. And then I have it on Amazon. And then it's just mainly by word of mouth. I let my friends know on Facebook. My college alumni magazine ran a blurb about the book.
Sure.
And I had a friend call me that they bought it. They read it in that magazine. So
tell us about the book festival.
My hometown newspaper wrote an article about it.
That's great. So tell us about the book festival.
I belong to the Austin Writers League. So every year they select a certain number of local authors to take their books to the festival. So I was fortunate to have a slot at the table this past year.
Okay.
So I went, and you have like an hour and a half, I think. You can sit at the table and people come by and you can talk to them about your book and explain it. And then they have an opportunity to buy your book.
Okay.
I really enjoyed that.
All right. So I have to ask too, it's again, kind of going back into earlier discussion about the kitchen. Are there any food recipes described, or do you have something in the book, because that alone would make me want to read the book. I mean, if there was like a recipe in it,
I should have put more recipes in it. I only put one.
Okay, that's good. Well, you can put more in the next book.
Was for maluf.
What is that?
The Syrian cabbage rolls.
Oh,
malfuf.
No, that sounds. Now, do you know how to make those?
Yeah, I make those. My grandmother was famous for making kibbe. And her Syrian bread, of course, was the best.
Oh, God, yeah.
And lentils. And, of course, a malfuf, which is cabbage rolls.
Sounds good. Well, definitely in book number 2, get those ready. Get those ready. So, Linda, if our readers would like to learn more about you and your work and the books, where are the best places for them to go? I
have a WordPress website that talks about the book. I have Instagram. I have an Amazon site.
Okay. And you're on LinkedIn as well. And we'll provide our links for you to the WordPress site, for the Syrian Peddler. We'll provide the links back to Instagram and LinkedIn, and we'll also provide the links back to Amazon as well. And on Amazon, to our listeners, you can get the Kindle version, the paperback version, but what's really special is there's an audio version. And there's something really special about that audio version. Linda, tell our listeners what that is.
Well, it could be that I play the piano music between the chapters.
There you go. That was it.
I looked for some Arabic music to use, and of course, it's all copyright. So I take piano lessons. So my music teacher, Janine Attaway, said, why don't we just use certain chords that have that Arabic flow to them, and you can make up your own? And that's what I did.
Fantastic. When you were writing the introduction to the book, and I was listening to it, and I could hear the chords in the background, and I thought that was really nice. I mean, that actually makes the audio book very attractive. Is that you get to look forward to between the chapters having the music. So I think well done on that.
The young man who recorded my book is Alex Ninola. He lives in my community here, and he came over to my home, and he actually used his professional equipment to record the music.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, we'll definitely give him a shout out in the show notes as well.
I should mention that Mike Sears, who's also lives in my community, is the narrator.
Okay. They
did a great job. And it was their first audio book for both of them.
Fantastic. Well, if they have websites or a site that they direct people to for their work, we're happy to put the show that in the show notes. And so we'll give them credit as well. So
okay, that would be great. Thank you.
My pleasure. So, Linda, we are looking forward to your continued success with the book, The Syrian Peddler. And with, now that book 1 is complete, you've been out there marketing it. You got your friends and family getting copies out there as well. And we're looking forward to book 2. And in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us on the Success Insight podcast. It's been a pleasure to chat with you today about, the Syrian Peddler and learn more about your grandfather and your family.
Could I just thank 2 more people?
You can thank whoever you want.
I want to thank my husband, Douglas Lloyd, for traveling with me to do all the research. And my editor, Susan Luton, who actually lives here in Austin.
Okay. Now, your husband, he went because he wanted to go with you. He didn't go with you because he had to. He wanted to go with you.
No, he wanted to go. I mean, we traveled everywhere. We even stopped at the Coal Mining Heritage Center in the Penn State campus in Fayette County. There's a Coal Mining Heritage Center.
Okay.
And we talked to a woman there who does the archives.
Okay.
And I picked up a lot of good information about the coal mining era. Okay. And I had like about 8 books I read to use as references. And those are in the book too. Fantastic.
And now your editor, is this her full-time profession? Is editing books?
Well, she's also an author.
Okay.
She's an author and an editor.
Okay. Well, send us her website link as well, and the spelling of her name, and we'll provide backlinks to that as well. So we'll make it one big happy family, everybody that supported you on this journey.
I will.
So, Linda, thank you again for taking the time. Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to hearing what our listeners think about the book, The Syrian Peddler, and just your continued journey as an award-winning and accomplished writer. So, novel number 2 is on its way.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, folks, we've just been chatting with Linda Lloyd, author of the historical novel, The Syrian Peddler. The book is available on Amazon, and do go out and pick yourself up a copy. And if you're into audiobooks, the music between the chapters is really what attracts me, because that, besides having somebody narrate the book on a long journey, I love the fact that the space between the chapters is filled with some wonderful music. And do go out to Linda's websites, the SyrianPeddler.wordpress.com, and we'll provide links back to that, LinkedIn and Instagram, as well as to the Amazon page. So, folks, if you enjoyed our podcast, please do comment on the podcast itself that we've just recorded with Linda, or send us a message about any of our other podcasts, or if you're interested in podcasting with us, we're available on successinsightpodcast.com. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, all Success Insight Podcasts. So do check us out. So, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there and have a phenomenal day. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.